There is something unfolding right now that you cannot yet fully see, something quiet but deeply significant, something that has been building beneath the surface long before this moment, and even if everything around you appears unchanged, even if your day feels ordinary and nothing seems out of place, there is a shift happening in a space you cannot directly observe, a movement within your soulmate that has been forming gradually. Before we dive into today's word, I want to thank our coffee partners. We are currently working toward a $120 goal to keep this ministry running and improve our quality. If this channel has been a blessing to you, please check the link in the description or comment box to support. Now, let's get into today's devotion. Piece by piece, through thoughts they did not initially understand, emotions they could not fully name, and a sense of something unfinished that has stayed with them even when they tried to focus on other parts of their life. And what makes this moment different from everything before is not just what they are feeling, but the clarity they are beginning to reach, because for a long time, what existed within them was subtle, almost unnoticeable, appearing only in brief moments, in passing thoughts, in memories that surfaced without warning and disappeared just as quickly, and at first, these moments did not seem important enough to question, they did not feel strong enough to hold on to, so they were set aside, ignored, or dismissed as something temporary, something connected only to the past. But over time, something changed in a way they could not control. Those thoughts began to return more often. Those memories began to stay longer, and instead of fading, they started to connect with each other, forming a clearer understanding, revealing something that had always been there but had never been fully acknowledged. And this is where everything began to shift, because once separate moments begin to form a pattern, once scattered thoughts begin to create consistency, it becomes impossible to ignore them in the same way. And this consistency is what has been guiding them toward a realization that now feels unavoidable, something they can no longer push aside or explain away, because it is no longer just a memory or a feeling, it has become an understanding, and understanding changes everything. It changes how they see the past, how they interpret the present, and how they begin to think about what comes next. And as this awareness deepened within them, they may have tried to continue as they normally would, focusing on responsibilities, engaging in conversations, maintaining the appearance that nothing had changed, but internally, something was different. Something was pulling their attention back to the same place again and again, not randomly, but with a sense of direction, as if their mind was guiding them towards something they had not fully allowed themselves to see before. And with each time this happened, the clarity became stronger, the connection between those thoughts became more defined, and what once felt uncertain began to feel real in a way they could not ignore. And as they started to reflect more deeply, memories that once seemed simple began to take on new meaning. Conversations that once felt ordinary now stood out in a different way. Moments where everything felt natural and unforced began to reveal a level of connection they had not fully recognized at the time. And this shift in perspective is what began to change how they understood everything, because it allowed them to see that what they experienced with you was not something random or easily replaceable. It was something specific, something meaningful, something that carried a depth they had not fully acknowledged before. And once that realization began to settle in, it brought with it a sense of emotional clarity, a recognition that what they felt was not something that belonged only to the past, but something that still existed in a way that had not faded. And this is where the intensity of the shift began to grow. Because once someone realizes that something meaningful has not truly disappeared, it becomes difficult to accept that it will remain unresolved, and this realization is what has been building within them, creating a quiet but persistent sense of movement, a feeling that something needs to be addressed, something needs to be understood more clearly, something needs to be expressed in a way that was not done before, and as this process continued, they may have started to notice the difference between what they had with you and what they have experienced since. Not in a dramatic or obvious way, but in small, subtle ways that became more noticeable over time, conversations that did not feel as natural, interactions that did not carry the same depth. To keep this content free and consistent, I'm looking for 24 friends to gift just $5 each to help hit our monthly goal of $120. Your generosity allows me to focus on the message while you help provide the means. God bless your giving. Moments that felt complete on the surface but lacked something they could not fully explain, and this comparison is what brought everything into sharper focus, because it showed them that what they had with you was not something that could be easily recreated, it was something unique, something that existed because of the way you and them connected in a way that felt effortless and real, and this awareness did not arrive all at once. It built gradually, piece by piece, until it reached a point where it could no longer be ignored. And once that point is reached, everything begins to change, because understanding does not remain passive, it begins to influence how a person thinks, how they feel, and what they begin to consider doing next, and right now, they are at the edge of that change, at the point where everything they have been realizing is starting to move beyond thought and into something more active, something that is no longer contained within them, something that is beginning to take shape in a way that will soon become visible, and even if you are not fully aware of it yet, even if you cannot see what is happening on their side, there may be a subtle feeling within you, a sense that something is shifting, that something is building, that something is about to change, and this feeling is not random, it is connected to what they are experiencing, to the process they are going through as they move from uncertainty into clarity, from reflection into understanding, and from understanding into the beginning of action, because once someone reaches this level of awareness, once they fully recognize both the value of what they had and the meaning it still holds, it does not remain a quiet realization for long, it begins to create direction, a pull towards something real, a need to address what has been left unspoken. And this is where everything begins to move toward the moment that is approaching, the moment where what has been building quietly inside them will no longer remain hidden, but will start to become something you can feel, something you can see, and something that will begin to reveal the truth about what your soulmate is really doing right now, not in a way that feels forced or sudden from their perspective, but in a way that has been forming over time, guided by every thought, every memory, and every realization that has led them to this point where nothing can remain the same any longer. As this internal shift continues to deepen within them, it begins to move beyond quiet reflection and into something far more consuming, something that no longer appears only in isolated moments but instead becomes a constant presence in their mind, following them throughout their day, lingering in the background of everything they do, and gradually becoming impossible to ignore no matter how much they try to focus on other things. Because what they are experiencing now is not just a memory resurfacing or a feeling returning briefly. It is a sustained awareness, something that has taken root and continues to grow stronger with time, and this is where everything begins to feel more real for them, more immediate, and far more difficult to dismiss, because once a realization reaches this level, it stops being something optional to engage with and becomes something that demands attention, something that shapes how they think, how they feel, and how they begin to see their current reality in comparison to what they once had with you, and as this awareness becomes more present, they may begin to notice that their thoughts are no longer scattered or uncertain, but instead focused, repeatedly returning to the same understanding that what existed between you was meaningful in a way they did not fully recognize before, and this repetition is what gives the realization its strength, because when a thought continues to return with the same clarity, it transforms into something undeniable, something that cannot be ignored or explained away as coincidence, and with each time their mind returns to you, the emotional connection becomes clearer, more defined, and more difficult to separate from their present experience, and this is where the shift begins to influence not only their thoughts but also their emotions in a more direct way, because now they are not just remembering what was. They are beginning to feel what is missing, and this feeling does not appear all at once in an overwhelming way, but instead builds gradually through small moments, through situations where they notice that something feels incomplete, where conversations lack the depth they once experienced, where interactions feel surface level compared to the natural understanding they shared with you. And this growing awareness of absence is what begins to create emotional weight, because once someone recognizes what is missing, it becomes increasingly difficult to accept that absence without questioning whether it can be changed, and as this process continues, they may begin to reflect more deeply on how things unfolded between you, not just recalling events, but analyzing them, trying to understand why certain choices were made, why certain words were left unspoken, why distance was allowed to grow when it could have been addressed, and these reflections do not immediately bring answers. But they do bring a deeper level of awareness, a recognition of their own role in how things developed, and this recognition is what begins to shape a sense of responsibility within them, because once someone understands that something meaningful was lost not because it lacked value but because it was not fully acknowledged or expressed, it creates a different kind of realization, one that is not just about the connection itself, but about their own actions within it, and this is where a sense of regret may begin to form, not in a chaotic or overwhelming way, but in a steady and clear way, something that stays with them, something that reminds them that what they had was significant and that it was not given the space it deserved at the time, and yet, this regret does not keep them stuck. It begins to guide them towards something more active, because once someone recognizes both the value of what they had and the role they played in losing it, it naturally creates a desire to change something, to address what was left unresolved, to take a step that they once avoided, and this is where their thoughts begin to shift from reflection into consideration, where they start to think not only about what happened, but about what could still happen, about whether it is possible to reconnect, about whether the connection can be revisited in a way that reflects the clarity they now have, and these thoughts bring with them a mixture of uncertainty and possibility, because while they feel strongly about what they have realized, they do not know how you will respond, they do not know whether your perspective has changed, they do not know whether the connection still exists for you in the same way, and yet, despite this uncertainty, the feeling does not fade. In fact, it becomes stronger, because now it is connected to the idea of action, to the possibility of changing something that once felt final, and as this continues to build within them, they may begin to notice that doing nothing, remaining silent, and allowing everything to stay as it is no longer feels comfortable or acceptable, because now they understand what they are leaving unresolved. And once that understanding is present, it becomes difficult to ignore, difficult to push aside, and difficult to accept without attempting to address it, and this is where everything begins to move closer to a turning point, because they are no longer in a place of passive awareness. They are in a place of growing intention, where their thoughts are beginning to align with the idea that something needs to be done, something needs to be expressed, something needs to be brought into the open, and even if they have not fully acted on it yet, the direction is becoming clear, the movement is becoming stronger, and the hesitation that once held them back is gradually losing its power. And you may begin to feel this shift in a subtle way, a sense that something is changing, that something is building beneath the surface, that something is moving toward you even if you cannot yet see it directly, and this feeling is not random, it is connected to what they are experiencing, to the process they are going through as they move from understanding into intention, and from intention into the early stages of action, because once someone reaches this level of clarity, once they fully recognize both the value of what they had and the meaning it still holds, it does not remain contained within them for long, it begins to create movement, a pull towards something real, a need to address what has been left unspoken, and this is where everything begins to move toward the moment that is approaching, the moment where what has been building inside them will begin to take form in a way that is no longer hidden, but visible, not just to them, but to you as well, and when that moment arrives, it may feel sudden from your perspective, but in reality, it is the result of everything they are doing right now, thinking, reflecting, understanding, and slowly preparing themselves to take a step that they once could not take, a step that is now becoming inevitable as the truth of what they feel continues to grow stronger and clearer with each passing moment. As this awareness continues to expand within them, it reaches a level where it is no longer something they can contain quietly without it influencing every part of their inner world, and this is where the emotional intensity begins to deepen in a way that feels constant, something that does not fade with distraction or time, something that follows them through even the most ordinary moments, because what they have realized is no longer just a thought. It is something they feel deeply, something that has become part of how they experience everything now, and this shift is what makes the situation impossible to return to how it once was, because once clarity reaches this level, it changes perception permanently, it reshapes how they see you, how they see the connection, and how they see themselves within that connection, and as this continues, they may begin to notice that their mind returns to you almost automatically, not in a way that feels forced or intentional, but in a way that feels natural, as if something within them is guiding their attention back to the same place again and again, and each time this happens, the clarity becomes stronger, the emotions become more defined, and the understanding becomes more complete, and the memories they revisit are no longer distant or vague. They are vivid, detailed, and connected to feelings that feel present, as if those moments are not just part of the past but something that still exists within them in a meaningful way, and they may begin to recall specific conversations, moments where everything felt easy, where there was no need to explain or overthink, where understanding existed without effort, and these memories begin to reveal something important, something they did not fully recognize before, which is that what they experienced with you was not something ordinary or temporary, but something that carried depth, authenticity, and a level of connection that is not easily found, and as they begin to see this more clearly, it changes how they interpret everything that followed, because now they are not just remembering what was. They are comparing it to what is, and this comparison is what brings everything into sharper focus, because it shows them that what they have experienced since does not carry the same feeling, the same natural connection, the same sense of understanding, and this realization is what begins to create a stronger emotional response, because once someone becomes aware that something meaningful is missing, it becomes difficult to accept that absence without questioning whether it can be changed, and this is where the sense of urgency begins to grow, not in a chaotic or overwhelming way, but in a steady and persistent way, something that stays with them, something that reminds them that there is something unfinished, something that was not fully expressed, something that still holds meaning even now, and as this awareness continues to deepen, they may begin to reflect more seriously on their own role in how things unfolded, asking themselves why they did not recognize the importance of what they had at the time, why they allowed distance to grow instead of addressing it, why they chose silence when they could have chosen honesty, and these questions do not bring immediate answers, but they do bring a deeper level of understanding, a recognition that something meaningful was left unresolved not because it lacked value, but because it was not fully acknowledged. And this realization is what begins to shape a sense of responsibility within them, because once someone understands that they had something real and allowed it to slip away without fully expressing what it meant, it creates a different kind of emotional weight, one that is not just about loss, but about awareness, and this awareness is what begins to transform regret into something more active, because instead of keeping them stuck in the past, it begins to guide them toward the idea that something can still be done, that something can still be expressed, that the story does not have to remain incomplete, and as these thoughts begin to take shape, they may start to consider what it would mean to reach out, to reconnect, to express what they now understand in a way that they could not before, and these considerations bring both uncertainty and possibility, because while they feel strongly about what they have realized, they do not know how you will respond, they do not know whether your perspective has changed, they do not know whether the connection still exists in the same way for you, and yet, despite this uncertainty, the desire to act does not fade. In fact, it becomes stronger, because now it is connected to a deeper understanding, a recognition that staying silent would mean repeating the same pattern, allowing something meaningful to remain unspoken even after realizing its value, and this is what begins to shift the balance within them, because the hesitation that once held them back is no longer as strong as it once was. It no longer has the same ability to stop them completely, instead, it exists alongside a growing sense of urgency. A feeling that something needs to change, something needs to be addressed, something needs to be brought into the open, and as this continues to build, they may begin to imagine what it would feel like to take that step, to finally express what they have been thinking and feeling, to break the silence that has existed for so long, and these thoughts begin to feel less distant, less hypothetical, more real, more possible, and with each time they consider this, the idea of action becomes more natural, more aligned with what they now understand, and at the same time, the emotional clarity they have gained continues to strengthen. They are no longer confused about what they feel, they are no longer uncertain about what the connection meant, everything is clear now, and that clarity is what gives them the confidence to move closer to action, even if they do not yet know the outcome. And you may begin to feel something shifting at this stage, a stronger awareness that something is building, that something is moving toward you in a way that feels more immediate, more present, and this feeling is not random, it is connected to what they are experiencing, to the stage they are in, where everything they have been processing internally is beginning to move outward, because once someone reaches this level of realization, once the emotional and mental clarity align in a way that feels undeniable, it does not remain contained for long, it begins to create movement, a pull toward expression, a need to act on what has been understood, and this is where everything begins to move toward a turning point, the moment where what has been building inside them can no longer remain hidden, but starts to take form in a way that will reach you directly, and when that moment arrives, it may feel sudden from your perspective, but in reality, it is the result of everything they are doing right now. Remembering, reflecting, understanding, feeling, and slowly preparing themselves to take a step that they once avoided but can no longer ignore, a step that is becoming inevitable as the truth of what they feel continues to grow stronger, clearer, and impossible to deny with each passing moment. As everything continues to build within them, it reaches a stage where the quiet awareness they have been carrying is no longer something they can simply observe without it influencing their need to act, and this is where the shift becomes more active, more focused, and far more difficult to delay, because what they are feeling now is not just recognition. It is direction, a sense that everything they have realized is leading them towards something specific, something that can no longer remain unresolved, and up until this point, they have been processing, reflecting, and slowly understanding what the connection meant, but there comes a moment when understanding alone is no longer enough, when awareness begins to create a sense of responsibility, a feeling that what has been realized must now be addressed in some way, and this is exactly where they are now, standing at the edge of action, where their thoughts are no longer passive or occasional but consistent, focused, and connected to a clear understanding that what they had with you was meaningful in a way they cannot ignore, and this consistency is what makes everything feel stronger, because when a thought returns again and again with the same clarity, it becomes something that shapes not only how a person feels but also what they begin to consider doing next, and as this continues, they may begin to feel a sense of restlessness, not chaotic or overwhelming, but steady and persistent, something that stays with them even when they try to focus on other things, something that reminds them that there is something unfinished, something that has not reached its conclusion. And this feeling is what begins to create movement, because once someone realizes that something meaningful has been left incomplete, it becomes difficult to accept that it will remain that way without trying to change it, and this is where their thoughts begin to shift more actively, moving beyond reflection and into questioning, asking themselves not just why things happened the way they did, but what they can do now to address it, whether they should reach out, whether they should explain what they have come to understand, whether they should take the risk of stepping back into something they once walked away from, and these questions become more frequent, more focused, and more difficult to ignore, because now they are no longer abstract. They are connected to a growing sense of urgency, a feeling that something needs to be done rather than simply thought about, and with each time they consider these questions, the idea of doing nothing begins to feel less acceptable, because now doing nothing feels like a choice in itself, a decision to leave something meaningful unresolved even after understanding its value, and this realization is what begins to shift the balance within them, because while hesitation still exists, it no longer has the same strength it once did. It no longer completely stops them, instead, it exists alongside a stronger force, a pull toward action that is becoming more difficult to resist, and as this internal balance continues to shift, they may begin to imagine what it would feel like to take that step, to reach out, to finally express what they have been thinking and feeling, and these thoughts are no longer distant or uncertain. They are becoming more real, more detailed, more aligned with what they now understand, and they may begin to consider how they would start that conversation, what they would say, how they would explain everything that has been building inside them, and even though these thoughts may still carry uncertainty about how you will respond, they also carry something else. A sense of possibility, because for the first time, they are not just thinking about what was lost, they are thinking about what might still be possible, and this shift in perspective is what brings everything closer to action, because once someone begins to see not only the past but also the potential future, it creates a different kind of motivation, one that is not rooted in regret alone but in the possibility of something meaningful being revisited or redefined, and at the same time, the emotional clarity they have gained continues to deepen. They are no longer confused about what they feel, they are no longer unsure about what the connection meant, everything is clear now, and that clarity is what gives them the confidence to move closer to action, even if they do not know what the outcome will be. And as this continues, they may begin to feel that waiting any longer only adds pressure to something that is already at its limit, because once someone knows what they need to do, delaying it does not make it easier. It makes it heavier. It creates a sense of something being held back, something that wants to move forward but is being paused unnecessarily, and this awareness is what begins to push them closer to the moment where everything shifts, and you may begin to feel something stronger at this stage, a sense that something is approaching, that something is moving toward you in a way that feels more immediate, more real, and this feeling is not random. It is connected to what they are experiencing, to the stage they are in, where their internal movement is beginning to become external, where their thoughts are aligning with action, where their understanding is turning into intention, and because of this, everything is now moving toward a point where what has been building inside them can no longer remain hidden, where the silence that once existed begins to break, where what they have been holding in begins to take form in a way that will reach you directly, and when that moment arrives, it may feel sudden from your perspective, but in reality, it is the result of everything they are doing right now, thinking, questioning, understanding, feeling, and slowly preparing themselves to take a step that once felt impossible but now feels necessary, a step that is no longer just an option, but something that is becoming inevitable as the truth of what they feel continues to guide them forward in a way that they can no longer ignore or resist. As everything continues to move forward within them, it reaches a stage where the distance between what they feel and what they are willing to do becomes smaller than ever before, and this is where the shift becomes undeniable, where what has been building quietly inside them is no longer something that can remain contained, but something that is actively pressing toward expression, toward action, toward a moment that will change everything. Because up until now they have been existing in a space between awareness and hesitation, understanding what they feel but still navigating the uncertainty that comes with expressing it, and while that hesitation once had enough strength to keep them still, to keep everything internal and unresolved, it is now beginning to weaken under the weight of clarity, because the more certain someone becomes about what they feel, the harder it is to justify doing nothing about it. And this is exactly where they find themselves now, in a state where the realization they have reached is no longer something they question, no longer something they try to analyze or understand further, but something they accept fully, something that feels clear, grounded, and undeniable, and this acceptance is what changes everything, because once a feeling is no longer uncertain, it begins to demand a response, it begins to create a sense of direction that naturally leads toward action, and as this continues to build, they may begin to notice that their thoughts are no longer scattered between different possibilities, but instead focused and aligned with a single understanding. That what they had with you was meaningful, that it still holds value, and that leaving it unresolved no longer feels right, no longer feels like something they can continue to ignore, and this focus is what creates a sense of urgency, not rushed or chaotic, but steady and persistent, something that follows them throughout their day, something that keeps returning no matter what they try to focus on, and with each time it returns, it becomes stronger, clearer, and more aligned with what they know to be true, and this is where their internal dialogue begins to shift in a significant way, because they are no longer asking themselves whether they should act. They are beginning to ask when and how, and this change may seem subtle, but it is powerful, because once the question moves from if to when, action becomes something that is no longer optional, but inevitable, and as they begin to consider this more seriously, they may start to imagine the moment itself, the moment where they finally take that step, where they reach out, where they express everything they have been holding inside. And these thoughts are no longer distant or hypothetical. They are intentional, as if they are mentally preparing themselves for something they already know is going to happen, and they may begin to think about what they will say, how they will explain what they have come to understand, how they will express something that has been building within them for so long, and with each time they go through this process, the idea of action becomes more natural, more real, more aligned with who they are now. And at the same time, the emotional clarity they have gained continues to deepen, reinforcing everything they already know. They are no longer confused about what they feel, they are no longer uncertain about what the connection meant. Everything is clear now, and that clarity is what gives them the confidence to move forward, even if they do not know how you will respond. And this is where something important happens internally, because the fear of the unknown, while still present, begins to lose its power in comparison to the certainty of what they feel. And when certainty outweighs fear, action becomes possible in a way it was not before. And as this continues, they may begin to feel that waiting any longer only adds pressure to something that is already at its limit, because once someone knows what they need to do, delaying it does not make it easier. It makes it heavier. It creates a sense of something being held back, something that wants to move forward but is being paused unnecessarily, and this awareness is what begins to push them closer to the moment where everything shifts. And you may begin to feel something stronger at this stage, a sense that something is about to happen, that something is moving toward you in a way that feels immediate, almost inevitable. And this feeling is not random, it is connected to what they are experiencing, to the stage they are in, where their internal decision is no longer forming. It is already formed, and now it is simply moving toward execution, and because of this, everything is aligning in a way that brings them closer to action, closer to the moment where the silence that once existed can no longer remain, where what they have been holding inside begins to move outward. And as this moment approaches, they may reach a point where everything comes together, where the clarity, the emotion, and the decision all align, and in that moment, they realize that there is nothing left to wait for, nothing left to understand, nothing left to question, because they have already done all of that, and the only thing left is to act. And this realization is what brings everything to the edge of change, to the point where what has been internal becomes external, where what has been hidden becomes visible, and when that moment finally arrives, it will not feel like a sudden or impulsive decision to them, but like the natural result of everything they have been experiencing, everything they have been realizing, everything that has been guiding them to this exact point, a point where they can no longer remain silent, where they can no longer leave things unresolved, and where they finally take the step that once felt impossible but now feels necessary. A step that will bring everything into the open and begin a new phase of the connection that is no longer defined by uncertainty or silence, but by truth, clarity, and the choice to act on what has been understood. Now everything reaches the moment where the boundary between preparation and action finally begins to dissolve, where what has been building inside them for so long can no longer remain in the space of thought alone. And this is where the shift becomes real in a way that cannot be reversed, because the decision that has been forming is no longer something they are considering. It is something they are ready to carry out, something that has moved from possibility into inevitability, and this is what makes this stage so powerful, because up until now, everything has existed within them, contained in their thoughts, their emotions, their reflections. But now it is beginning to move outward, into something that will have a direct impact, something that will reach you in a way that cannot be undone or taken back. And as this transition happens, they may begin to feel a combination of emotions that are both steady and intense, not chaotic, but deeply present, because while they are certain about what they feel, they are also aware that what they are about to do will change everything, and that awareness brings a natural sense of vulnerability, a recognition that once they take this step, they are no longer in control of how things will unfold, and yet, despite that vulnerability, the clarity they have gained is stronger than any hesitation that remains. Because they are no longer questioning what they feel, they are no longer unsure about what the connection meant, they are no longer trying to understand whether this is something they should act on, that part of the process is complete, and what remains now is a sense of direction, a feeling that everything is pointing toward a single outcome. Expression, and as this becomes clearer, they may begin to notice that their thoughts are no longer scattered or divided between different possibilities, but instead focused, aligned, and moving in one direction, and this alignment is what creates momentum, because once a person's thoughts, emotions, and understanding all point toward the same conclusion, action becomes something that is not only possible, but necessary. And as this momentum continues to build, they may begin to prepare themselves more deliberately, not just imagining the moment, but planning it, considering how they will approach you, how they will express what they have come to understand, how they will explain the silence that once existed and the realization that has replaced it, and this preparation is not driven by confusion, but by intention, a desire to be clear, to be honest, to express something that has taken time to fully form. And with each time they go through this process, the step becomes more real, more immediate, more unavoidable, and at the same time, they may begin to feel that waiting any longer only adds pressure to something that is already at its limit, because once someone knows what they need to do, delaying it does not make it easier. It makes it heavier, it creates a sense of something being held back, something that wants to move forward but is being paused unnecessarily, and this awareness is what pushes them forward, what brings them closer to the exact moment where everything shifts, and you may begin to feel something very strong at this stage, a sense that something is about to happen, that something is moving toward you in a way that feels direct, undeniable, and real, and this feeling is not random, it is connected to what they are experiencing, to the moment they are approaching, to the fact that everything they have been processing internally is about to become something external, something you will experience directly, and as this moment arrives, they may reach a point where everything aligns completely, where the clarity, the emotion, and the decision all come together in a way that leaves no room for hesitation, and in that moment, they realize that there is nothing left to wait for, nothing left to question, nothing left to understand, because they have already done all of that, and the only thing left is to act, and so they do, whether it is through a message, a call, or some form of direct communication, they finally take the step they once avoided, they finally express what they have been holding inside, and in that moment, everything changes, because the silence that once existed is broken. What was once internal becomes external, what was once hidden becomes visible, and for them, there is a sense of release, not because everything is resolved, but because they have finally done what they felt they needed to do, they have allowed the truth to move beyond themselves, they have taken the step that has been building within them for so long, and at the same time, there is vulnerability, because now the outcome is no longer in their control, they have opened the door, but what happens next depends on you. And you may experience this moment as something sudden, something unexpected, something that seems to appear without warning, especially if you were not aware of everything that has been happening on their side, but for them, this has been a long process, something that developed gradually, something that took time to fully form, and now that the step has been taken, everything that follows will unfold in a space that is no longer defined by silence or uncertainty, but by truth, honesty, and the connection that is now fully visible between you, a connection that has moved beyond the stage of being hidden or unspoken and into something real, something that will now continue to evolve based on what has been expressed, what has been revealed, and what you choose to do with it as everything begins to move forward from this moment of undeniable change. Now that the moment of action has finally arrived and what was once held quietly within them has been brought fully into the open, everything begins to shift into an entirely new phase, one where the connection is no longer shaped by silence, distance, or uncertainty, but by what has now been expressed, and this is where the true impact of everything they have felt begins to unfold in a way that directly involves you. Because up until this point, the entire process has existed within them, in their thoughts, in their emotions, in their gradual realization, but now that they have taken that step, now that they have chosen to act instead of remain silent, what was once internal has become shared, something that now exists between both of you rather than within one person alone, and this change is significant because it shifts the entire dynamic of the connection from something unknown into something visible, something that can be responded to, understood, and experienced in real time. And for them, this moment marks the end of a long internal journey, a period where they were trying to understand what they felt without knowing how or when to express it, and now that they have crossed that threshold, now that they have allowed themselves to be honest, there is a sense of release that comes with it, not because everything is resolved, but because they are no longer carrying something that remained incomplete inside them. They have given form to what they feel, they have allowed it to exist outside of themselves, and in doing so, they have stepped into a space of vulnerability that they can no longer avoid, because now everything they have realized, everything they have chosen to express, is no longer something they can control, it is something you now see, something you now understand, something that you now have the ability to respond to in your own way. And this is where a different kind of awareness begins to settle within them, one that is no longer focused on what they feel, but on what you might feel, how you might interpret what they have said, how you might experience this moment from your perspective, and they may begin to wonder whether you see the depth behind their decision, whether you understand that this was not something impulsive, but something that has been building over time, something that required them to move through hesitation, through uncertainty, through a lack of clarity before they could finally reach this point, and these thoughts do not come from doubt about their choice, but from an awareness that the outcome is no longer theirs to determine alone, because they have done what they needed to do, they have expressed the truth, and now everything that follows depends on how that truth is received, and at the same time, their mind may continue to return to you, but in a different way than before, not with the same urgency or internal conflict, but with curiosity, with anticipation, with a quiet sense of hope, wondering how you are processing this moment, how you are reflecting on what has been revealed, how you are seeing the connection now that everything is clear, and they may find themselves replaying what they expressed, not because they regret it, but because they want to understand how it might be experienced from your side, whether they communicated everything clearly, whether they showed the full depth of what they have come to understand, whether they were able to express something that took so long to fully form, and through all of this, there is one consistent awareness that remains within them. They have chosen you, not in a passive or uncertain way, but in a conscious and deliberate way, and that choice is now something real, something that exists beyond thought, beyond feeling, something that has been put into action, and you, on the other hand, may be experiencing this moment very differently, because from your perspective, it may feel sudden, unexpected, something that appeared without warning, especially if you were not aware of everything that has been happening on their side. Because what you are seeing now is the result of a process that you did not witness, a process that unfolded gradually within them until it reached a point where it could no longer remain hidden, and this is why the moment may feel intense or surprising, because it carries the weight of everything they have been experiencing over time, compressed into a single point of expression, and as you begin to process this, you may find yourself reflecting on the connection in a new way, not through uncertainty or assumption, but through clarity, because for the first time, you are not guessing what they feel or what their silence meant, you have been shown directly, and that clarity allows you to step back and see everything from a different perspective, to consider how you feel about what has been expressed, how you see the connection now, and how it aligns with the person you are today, because time, distance, and your own experiences have shaped your perspective as well. And you are not the same person you were when everything first unfolded, which means that your response is not simply a continuation of the past, but a reflection of your present understanding, and this is where the focus begins to shift from their decision to your awareness, because now the next step is not determined by what they have done, but by how you choose to respond to it, and you may begin to ask yourself important questions. Not out of confusion, but out of clarity. What does this connection mean to you now? Does it still hold the same value? Does it align with who you have become? Do you feel that there is something here worth exploring now that everything is open and honest? Or do you feel that while their choice is meaningful, your path has moved in a different direction, and these questions are not meant to create doubt, but to guide you toward your own truth? Because this moment is not just about their action. It is about your understanding, your awareness, and your ability to choose what feels right for you, and as everything continues to settle, the intensity of the moment may begin to soften, not because it has lost its importance, but because it has gained clarity, because once something is understood, it no longer needs to exist in a state of uncertainty. And this is what allows both of you to move forward from this point, not in a space defined by what was left unsaid, but in a space defined by what has now been revealed, a space where honesty replaces silence, where clarity replaces confusion, and where whatever happens next will be shaped not by what was hidden, but by everything that is now fully visible between you.